Hello, everyone, and welcome to Policies for an Equitable Recovery. This is the breakout session that should last about 20-25 minutes. Welcome. My name is Judy Kruger, and I'll be your moderator for this session. We're going to be covering a lot in a very short time frame. I know we're a little delayed, but we have some fantastic panelists this morning. So let's just jump right into it. I'm going to introduce Tunua Thrash-Ntuk. She's Executive Director for the Los Angeles Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC-LA. And we have Noor, Menai, President and CEO of CTBC Bank USA. And we have Dr. Manuel Pastor, Distinguished Professor and Director at USC's Equity Research Institute. So we're going to just jump right into some of the panel discussions. We've got a lot of information to cover this morning. And welcome, panelists. I'm going to jump right into some of the key questions we have related to policy and equity. Tunua, what are the 5 key areas that you see that are really important right now?
Well, Judy, thanks so much for having me here and for the introduction. So glad to be alongside colleagues such as Dr. Pastor and Noor Menai. When it comes to looking at what we need to be doing as a society, as cities, as jurisdictions, as organizations, you and I had a chance to talk about some of the 5 areas that we thought were really critical. And, first of all, there are a number of folks who are still quite housing insecure. Eviction is still an issue. Being able to afford maintaining rent and staying housed is really critical. And so one of the first issues is we've got to make sure we keep people housed, and we have to continue our policies around going ahead and getting creative about purchasing hotels and other properties where we can get people and maintain their housing for them. So that continues to be critical. Second, what we saw and what we heard from the earlier presentation is that wages were already, pretty low and depressed, and especially for low-income people, for people of color. And it's really critical that we start to look at how do we help people recover with wages that can really sustain a family. So that's really the second area. The third area is one that is focused on what can we do as far as what we know cities and companies and others are already purchasing. Can we create procurement pipelines that really focus on those parts of our city where businesses are really struggling to get ahead? Let's focus our spend on diverse-owned businesses as well that have been hardest hit by this COVID pandemic. The issue of childcare and elder care is one that I think people forget because we do our best to be on Zoom and hope the kids don't come in and, hope that we can sort of manage all of the other duties. But I do believe that working women, families in general that are working, those who are taking care of other loved ones, in order for us to really get back to an equitable recovery, we're going to have to address making sure that there are resources for those families and individuals. And then finally, when I look at what has happened in terms of places in our region, certainly here in LA County, those being commercial corridors that were already decimated pre-COVID pandemic. Certainly with the COVID pandemic, we've got more empty commercial storefronts, and we've really got to engage with activating those commercial spaces in neighborhoods that really need that economic vibrancy the most. And so focusing on policies that, help businesses stay in place and give them a chance to be within a corridor are really critical. So Judy, I'll stop there and let you go ahead and continue on.
Thank you, Tunua. We're going to get back to some of those issues, but let me pivot just a minute to Manuel. Absolutely critical right now on the equity and policy discussion is the digital divide. Can you bring voice to the concerns now? I mean, the state of California and the federal government has talked about the digital divide for 10, 15 years, policies, councils, plans. But what's the sense of urgency now, and what can we do to create actionable and quick policies right now?
Well, in very broad terms first, and then the specifics. In broad terms, it's important to realize that COVID is the disease that revealed our illnesses as a society. the precarity of employment, so many people just a short hop away from being destitute, the racial wealth gaps that exist so that Black and Latino workers didn't have a cushion where they felt it would be safe to stay home, the insecurity of legal status. People forget that in Los Angeles County, 18% of our residents are either undocumented themselves or living with a family member who is. Big mixed status families, fear of attaching systems. And the other thing that COVID revealed was the digital divide. When the school shutdowns happened, we calculated that of the kids in LA County who were in K through 12, about 13% of white kids went home to the wrong side of the digital divide, meaning that they were in a house where there wasn't high-speed internet and a laptop or a desktop computer, which of course is much better than your phone or an iPad. 13% of white kids on the wrong side of the digital divide. But that was about 35% of Black kids and about 40% of Latino kids going home on the wrong side of the digital divide. So what has that meant? It's meant a year of lost learning for a couple of reasons, because you're not able to do as much remote learning, but also because your family may not be as educated about how to help you navigate the internet and the learning tools that are available. So we've got a big educational crisis that we're facing right now, which is about to get exacerbated because when you look at the pattern of school reopenings, it's the whiter and wealthier districts where there's less disease and they're much better able to reopen than the poorer districts that have been riven by the COVID disease. So there's lost learning. There's also vaccine inequity, because any of you who've tried to get a vaccine realize that what you need is a high-speed internet connection and a browser that's got a refresh button and a whole lot of time to be able to hit that refresh button, and 4 or 5 hours to spend at Dodger Stadium, which is pretty hard to arrange if you've got a low-wage job where you might be fired if you don't show up. And then finally, looking forward, the digital access is key to economic and civic participation. The ability to buy goods cheaply, the ability to train, the ability to interact with the economy, and increasingly probably the ability to go to a Zoom council meeting and be able to voice your concerns at your local city council or school board. So this is finally coming to the attention of everyone. The concern I have is that the way that people are thinking about it is simply through the pipeline. That is, if we could get the pipes to the communities, that's what we need to do. You know, there's actually plenty high-speed internet running through South LA. There are gaps, of course, where we need better coverage. But a lot of it is that people cannot afford the services. A lot of it is that people don't have the digital literacy. A lot of it is that there aren't local community-based programs to train people how to use the internet or to equip them to help their children using the internet. These are the kind of things, by the way, that Tunua can talk quite eloquently about. So to me, I think we need to, when we think about the digital divide, stop thinking about the pipes. Those are important. Let's get the infrastructure out there and start thinking not just about the hard infrastructure, but about the soft infrastructure. That means much more funding for community-based learning centers, much more funding for training kids at the schools and training their parents, much more of that sort of trusted messenger kind of stuff that's important for the vaccine rollout, but it's also important for people stepping up to the digital divide. Tunua, I hate to be the questioner because I know that's Judy's job, but I know how much work LISC does in communities. Does that analysis make sense to you?
Absolutely, Dr. Pastor. I saved that area for you in terms of what can and should we be doing. Yes, we've got to house people. We have to give them wages that they can, use to sustain families. We've got to give them access to resources. But beyond that, what we've seen right now is that everybody's got to be able to access the internet. A huge part of what I've been talking about is, where are the bubbles around our communities that allow for people to freely access the opportunity to be able to connect within the internet. Too many of our kids are, driving to a local fast food restaurant in order to be able to get stable internet. Too many of our families are just hoping that they can get somewhere near a lobby of some business where there might be some level of free internet access. And we know now that it's just like a utility. It's a critical component of being able to operate in society right now.
And I just want to add, and I think this is a big theme for LAEDC generally, is that we need to stop thinking about equity as just a fairness issue. Equity is actually key to our prosperity. If we've got a generation of kids who've lost a year of school because of the digital divide, that's not good for your workforce going forward. If you've got a group of adults who are not able to access vaccines, even though they've got the right to do that, that's not good for getting back to work, particularly when we know that the COVID is ripping its way through the poorest communities because of the combination of risky work that people are engaged in and overcrowded housing. We know that when we've got immigrants who don't have legal status, they're not able to fully realize their ability to start businesses, to contribute to communities, to contribute to businesses. We know that when workers are underpaid, they don't have the purchasing power and they don't really have the kind of loyalty and motivation that you want from your kind of workers. I know what Noor will probably wind up talking about, which is that the financial equity pieces, if we think about equity in terms of being able to build worth in your home, and that's one part of equity, but we've got a system that systematically doesn't allow people to build wealth, that actually diminishes our overall prosperity. So my key message here is that closing the digital divide is crucial. It requires our investment in the soft infrastructure, not the hard infrastructure. And there is a business case for doing this. That means that groups like LAEDC and the corporate leaders who are part of this Zoom conference need to step up to. This is not a special interest. This is in all of our interests.
And that you make a very good point. You and many others talked about how non-equity already makes communities susceptible to recessions and issues related to pandemic. You were already saying it before this. So the pandemic just provides a focal point to what you had already said and what is playing out right now. And we don't mean to ignore Noor because Tunua and Manuel need to hop off. So Noor, we're going to ask you that very question that Manuel already queued up to you about the digital divide and finances. But before Manuel and Tunua need to hop off, and Noor, you and I will continue the conversation. But Tunua, can you please bring voice to the issues that relate to, you think, and you have said that it is absolutely critical right now, and the issue of the day is protecting, the challenge of the day is making real life policies for women and women of color. Can you add a little bit more texture to that?
Yeah, it's I want to say silent, but I've refused to say stay silent on it no more. Frankly, we are seeing women leave the workforce at alarming rates. We have fewer women in the workforce than we did even a couple of decades ago when we made major strides to ensure that this half or more population of our society is able to contribute to the workforce. For women of color, they are losing out even more, losing employment, losing wages, and that's impacting families in a real way. And even our, national economist at the Labor Department is looking at this and writing about it and talking about how important it is that we begin to invest in the infrastructure in employers, in cities, in schools, that ensure that working families, and in particular working women, are able to return to the workforce and continue to contribute. While COVID has uncovered the racial wealth gap, COVID has uncovered the health gap, COVID has also uncovered the work at home gap that many women and those who have single, breadwinners and families in terms of that work that needs to be done. So I'm looking forward to being able to really focus on policies that give people the flexibility of being able, to work at various times. If you have the privilege of being able to work online, of us deciding as a local society that we're going to invest in the resources so that our local community colleges, our local schools, all of our other local institutions have the resources so that working families can have support around them. And certainly at the federal level, we've got to do better. Frankly, I was enjoying an article that Elizabeth Warren had put out about sort of ringing the bell on the importance of having a national and coherent policy to support especially women who've lost so much during this COVID crisis.
And thank you. And I'm going to say a huge thank you to Manuel and Tunua, and I'm going to excuse you. I know you had a hard stop, and we are about 30 minutes off on our schedule, and we really appreciate you joining this breakout session. So thank you very much. And we will excuse you. And now I will shift some questions over to Noor. We didn't mean to exclude you, but you had a little more time on your calendar.
Noor, all the hard questions are coming your way.
Take it from here, Noor.
I'll report back. Thank you, guys. Privilege being with you on the same stage with you guys.
Thank you. All right, Noor. So talk to us a little bit about what's going on in your area of expertise, especially as it relates to PPP and the future and an equitable policy rollout. What's going to happen, and what do you suggest?
Sure. Let me just respond very quickly to something Dr. Pastor had mentioned, which he didn't explicitly bring this up, but I think what he was talking about when he talked about the digital divide, and he highlighted some of the underlying issues and the challenges, is explicitly it talks about the role of government. Mm-hmm. And especially as it relates to access. And I think once you peel the layers, and as he was about to do, when you peel the layers on what access really means and how it pertains to fairness as well as actual access, it's the conceit or the animating thought behind the role of government. And I know obviously philosophies on both sides has always been to highlight issues. But where I think where we are at the current moment in the United States, as well as most of the Western world, is that the government thinks that they've found this balance where private enterprise can tackle some of the really challenging issues. So, for example, this issue of digital divide, Dr. Pastor was absolutely right. It keeps being talked about as, let's just lay the pipes, let's get broadband out. In the UK, they talk about the same thing. In Australia, they talk about the same thing. And here, certainly in the United States, they talk about the FTC and the communications industry, the phone companies. They all talk about, let's just lay the pipes. But as Dr. Pastor brought out, it's also about teaching people how to utilize that. And that's where the point I wanted to bring out is the private enterprise that exists around that are all these so-called startups and digital companies. But the animating thought, the philosophy that they have is everybody knows how to use digital tools. And what they don't, so they've designed some pretty spectacular digital businesses around K2 and education, but they haven't talked about how to train the parents. They haven't talked about how do you set up the environment, all the trappings of a schooling system through that one screen. So while we don't have answers today, but I thought that was a brilliant teasing out of an issue that if the role of government is to bring that back to private enterprise, or at least highlight it from pulpits such as this one, or even Congress, to send that message out to the entrepreneurs and the folks setting up digital companies to say, yes, we know you got it about the broadband, we know you got it about the cool sites, but there's an assumption you have here that says people know how to use it. They don't, so maybe that's an area. So with that said, I'll get to your question, Judy, which is where are we with? So just a little short stroll down the last, since what happened since March. So and just speaking, from the as a private citizen as well as a banker here in the Los Angeles community. We run about a $4 billion community bank here. We're deeply embedded in the community. We have 13 branches, mostly in areas where we see a lot of small businesses. So what really left us quite happy was the speed at which the government moved, the previous administration, to address this issue of the fact that nearly half of America's employees, workers, work for small businesses. There are 32 million small businesses, and they were going to go under. And there was a very swift recognition of that fact. And at lightning speed, I think they were able to come up with a hastily put together, and some of the issues with that, the haste in which it was put together, came about very quickly. But they were able, as I said, what we wanted to applaud is the speed at which they moved. And they partnered with the one government agency, semi-government agency, that was best positioned to understand what small businesses are, what the issues are, and that was the SBA. And so they initially put together a $300 billion program, and then they topped it up with another $300 billion, about 700, so equivalent to the TARP rescue of the early 2008s, which took a much longer time to get out. So this met with bipartisan support in Congress. It was approved. And so largely, for those of you who are unaware, the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, was under the CARES Act. And the intent was to make it very easy for small businesses, as well as some larger businesses, to come in and get protection for paying their employees or other expenses. So while that was the intent, and it was very successful, it ran out of money almost in the first couple of weeks, and then that's why Congress had to re-up it. The Treasury Department had to re-up it. So overall, largely successful, got money very quickly, but there were some issues with it. It didn't pay the right amount of attention to really small businesses, right? The businesses that are owned by minorities, the businesses that are owned by people of color, and about the issue of access. And access in this particular case, and this applies to most of the challenges around access in financial services, which is it's not enough to say we have a product that addresses a particular segment of the population. You also have to make it easy for them to apply and to get approved for it, and to look at the structural issues, whether it's credit scores, whether it's ability to fill out a form, whether it's ability to do a business plan. It didn't address those issues. And that's where the community banks came in as the so-called last mile, in that we were able to do the hand-holding. We were able to be the folks who could still had branches open in COVID restricted sort of regimens, but we had people could come in, we would help them fill out the forms. I personally called up the small businesses in my area where I live here in Palos Verdes, lots of small restaurants, and we made them aware that the government has this program. A lot of the larger banks weren't able, they're built for scale. They're built for people coming in and leaving. They have these metrics that says every bit of service needs to be delivered very quickly, and they're not really meant for the relationship building that community banks do. So a lot of traffic started coming over to us. This was in the first round. And there was some fraud. There was some money that went to folks it shouldn't have gone to. Overall, even though it was a success, it wasn't targeted towards really small businesses. So when the second wave came out, which we are in right now, which is that $900 billion program that got approved, is now it's purpose built to help the real small businesses. So the forgiveness aspect is a lot easier. The application process is a lot easier. And what they did overtly is to say that when this program gets launched, which was about 3 weeks ago, it would only be open to small community banks to administer the loan. So the large banks with the large customers, which is sort of a selection bias, was controlled in that way. And community banks were told that exclusively for the first week or so, the monies would only be available through the SBA to us, which was a way of channeling that money to real small businesses and allowing us to serve the communities we are in. There were structural changes as well. As I said, it's a lot easier to ask for forgiveness. It's a lot easier to get approved. It's a lot easier to get a bigger amount. The amount that used to be approved was only auto forgiveness, as it's called, is now up to $150,000. So it's once again, this is I think a very well received program, and it's still out there. It's still going on, and we're seeing a lot of interest in it. This program crucially also allows folks who got money in the first round to reapply if they can prove that their revenues are still off by 25% from the same quarter last year. And so that's an easy hurdle for most small businesses to demonstrate or to jump over. Where we are today, you talked about the issue of access. So as I thought about this, and having lived through the last year of being 100% remote and being in this position of helping people, I found that our biggest challenge was getting the message out. So the folks who most needed the money, the folks with 3 or 4, 10 employees and running restaurants or professional services or small little businesses in the neighborhoods that we serve, they didn't know about this program. So to get the message out. Then once they knew about it, they actually didn't have the wherewithal or the sophistication or the time, as the previous speaker was referring to actually go online, live through all the these party services and actually fill out the applications. So we found that a lot of these customers would be coming to our branches or calling us up and saying, can you help us fill out this form? So this issue of access became about financial literacy. It became about, do you have an accountant? So if I had to write out what I would worry about if I was designing this program, I would also launch it with some sort of financial literacy program and make sure that the folks through which this, or the companies or the banks that this gets administered to, have branches in the right communities. We've been hearing for years and decades that banks needs to have access, the ATMs and the products that are targeted for these communities. And yet it's a difficult decision to put a branch of an international bank that does billions of dollars of business in a less underprivileged area. But that's exactly what's needed. That's what community banks do. And so that's where I think, we've spoken about this. I'll pause for your comment.
Yes, and I do apologize. We are a little bit over time. Thank you so much for all the comments. We really appreciate giving some layers to the issues related to PPE and especially small businesses and how this is going to roll out. Thank you again. We really appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Part of this
Pleasure being here.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.